Welcome to the Plain Truth Discussion, where no conspiratorial rock will be left unturned, no mainstream propaganda will go unchallenged, and all existing reality boxes will be shattered. Piloting the discussion, as always, is a jet-setting international man of mystery codenamed Plain. Co-piloting the storm clouds are the Time Monk veterans Herm and myself, the tea-drinking rabbit. Tonight's frequency is being broadcast across the secure Time Monk radio channels, so sit back, buckle your seatbelts, and ensure all overhead bins are secured, because we are definitely in for a very turbulent ride. Tonight's topic is the Hollywoodization of terrorism.
Hi, Oolong. How you doing?
Good. I guess tonight we're going to discuss the Hollywoodization of terrorism.
Well, I was just kind of thinking about terrorism, but also news in general, or kind of, I guess, what you would say is major events. And I thought I would start by going into kind of some things from the past, because while we look at things like this recent supposed beheading in London,
right,
in Woolwich, and now many are arguing that there's no blood, and there are different videos that make this seem, and that, the guy's background, it seems like there may be doubles, two people with the same names, and various other things. I thought we ought to kind of refresh our memory with some of the things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would just start out by saying, what's past is prologue, as the Tempest, as Shakespeare said in The Tempest. And in a sense, there's nothing new under the sun. So when we look at these new events, like, let's say, Boston, where it seems like basically there are massive numbers of actors running around, is this new? Or have they been doing this kind of thing for a long time? So that's kind of where I wanted to start. And a most obvious thing is, you remember with the Oswalds, how many Lee Harvey Oswalds were there? At least two major ones, and then probably more minor ones. And I think what I'm trying to say is we should look at our news as being one big Hollywood production.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
We've got actors, we've got false flags, we've got everything going on. And it's difficult to understand because some of the things may be rituals, some of the things may be simply to promote fear or terror. They have different motives, and we can't always figure it out. But what we really can see is just that we're being lied to across the board.
Well,
so that's kind of... Oh, you disagree?
Well, no, I was just going to say it's nothing new under the sun, because if you look back even to the founding, there was an Ismaili group within Islam called the Hashashim, or better known today as the Assassins. And one of the tricks they pulled was they used to drug the candidates, and then they would take them into a room and have beautiful women and have the finest silks and metals and everything, and they basically told them it was paradise. So when the drug stupor wore off, the sheik would bring them back, and he would say, the only way you can get back into paradise is through me. And then one of the tricks he pulled was he would take a guy and he would cut a hole in the floor, and he'd put the guy in the floor and a platter around his head to make it look like he had a severed head, and he'd kind of paint it up with blood. Then he'd bring the candidates in and he'd say, look, I've reanimated this guy from the dead, and he'd get the guy to open his eyes and start talking. So to these guys, it looked like the guy was dead and he was magically brought back to life. Then afterwards, when they weren't around, he would actually murder this guy and chop his head off and stick it on a pole, so that it perfected the illusions that these guys realized that, or not realized, but they actually thought that he had reanimated the guy's head and had it talking to him. So basically, what the moral of the story is that these false flags and these mind control operations are really nothing new.
Exactly. That's kind of what I wanted to point out. I mean, some people have kind of avoided this topic a bit. They think it's too messy, and maybe they're afraid of being called conspiracy theorists, which is, of course, kind of funny, but we're all basically conspiracy theorists, aren't we? I mean, in this sense. But anyway, looking back in the past, I thought I'd give you an interesting thing. The other day, I was meandering around, wasting time on the internet, and I ran into a song by Emmylou Harris. and it's called something like The Boy from Tupelo. And I don't know if, maybe I'm showing my age here, but Tupelo, Mississippi is where Elvis Presley was from. And in the song, she talks about essentially vanishing. It'll be the perfect crime. Just ask the boy from Tupelo. He's the king and he ought to know. And I don't know if, Oolong, I don't know if you remember or you realize there's really a tremendous amount of evidence that Elvis Presley staged his death. Have you ever looked into that?
I mean, I've heard rumors of that. I've heard rumors of Jim Morrison especially staging his death. But Elvis is a little bit before my time. I'm only 37.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought going back, this might be worthwhile because Elvis is kind of like the first rock idol, right? He's the guy that people like the Rolling Stones got so excited about. And here he was, a guy who, we're told, died in his prime, right? 42 years old. And you think about it and you say, well, it must be true. But I was there in the sense that I remember that time. I'm old enough that I remember it. And I can tell you that there were a lot of serious questions at the time. And as time has passed, I actually think it's much, much worse. But to just start out with a few things, he dies, and then when you listen to the friends, family, and all their stories, by the way, he was buried within one day, right? The funeral was the next day. And you see, 8 guys carrying this 1,000-pound casket around, and it looked totally bizarre. Anyway, supposedly they buried him, but you get these interviews with people, and the story changed several times within the first week. What time he was found, did he look blue or not? The list went on and on. And when you saw people around him, you obviously got the feeling they were under pressure or lying or something. And like many at the time, I just figured, well, okay, the record business is run by the mafia, or, maybe these people were stealing from him and stuff like that anyway, or maybe they were providing pills to him and maybe he overdosed, right? But over time, it became more and more obvious that there were some problems with this. I'll give you an example. I was living in a small town in the South, or medium-sized town in the South, and in less than a week, there was a massive campaign with everything about him imaginable, including memorial stuff made in Taiwan. And this was back before the modern distribution system. So to have stuff, let's say 5 days later, about, memorial stuff from a guy who died, and it was made in Taiwan, and it got to, small towns in the South, that's a world-class performance. In the marketing campaign, if you're 37, it was the biggest marketing campaign the world's ever seen, and it happened immediately. I mean, within days, it was like you just had never seen anything like this. And this raises some questions because, first of all, Presley and his management, they had all kinds of problems going on at the time. I don't know. Anyway, I could go on about this, but I just wanted to remind people that fake deaths, doubles, stage things, these are really quite common. And if you look into it, you'll see an amazing number of them. And this is one where, okay, how about this? Elvis Presley was a good friend of Jerry Lee Lewis. And Jerry Lee Lewis went on TV and he said, Elvis was smart. He got out at the top. Is that what you would say about a friend of yours who died at age 42?
Well, Jerry Lee Lewis was a bit crazy, though. I wouldn't put anything past him.
That's true. But I can also show you many, many videos of Elvis's friends or his daughters or others where essentially they say something that means he's alive, and then they oops, and then they oops, and then they move on. And the point is, we shouldn't take as being true that what we see on TV, because they have vested interests. They can
Oh,
be
for sure.
like the record business is run by the mafia, right? And, sometimes they, like, did you ever read the book, The War on Rock?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, it was by Alex Constantine. And in this book, he does investigative work and shows that a very large number of musicians that we think died of an overdose or whatever didn't. They were murdered. Frequently, they were murdered because a dead rock star is worth more to a mafia recording company than if he goes out on his own once the contract is over.
I've actually, on a similar note, I've heard or actually seen a video clip that Paul McCartney, the original Paul McCartney, actually died in a car crash, and apparently the Beatles left all these clues throughout their albums, and I thought, when I first heard it, I thought that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. But then when I started looking at the evidence, I was like, maybe there is something to this. It's actually quite an interesting trail.
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence for that. But here, besides the fact I've looked into that, here's something you might find amusing. When it happened, there were voice analyses done. And a professor in southern Florida came out and said that with the Sgt. Pepper's album, there were 3 Paul McCartneys.
Really?
And so I've looked into it, and I thought, well, I want to get some voice analysis software. $4,000 or $5,000, and they don't even want to sell it. They want to sell it to institutions, not to individuals, because then you'd have a better idea. And that gets back to my point in this whole topic, is that doubles, composites out of videos and things like that, all kinds of things. These things are routine, and they've been used by the intelligence agencies for a long, long time. And sometimes it's benign, it's a double taking somebody's role, right? If the leader of a country is injured in a skiing accident or whatever, they don't want to admit that, and then they just have somebody cut a ribbon, right?
Yeah, like as in Saddam Hussein and his children
or whatever.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's easy to understand. It's not really so exciting, but I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's that we need to always be on the lookout for these things. And now with today's technologies, they can really, really manipulate things. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if they could fake and pull it off the death of, the first or biggest rock idol of all time, Elvis Presley, or Paul McCartney, a Beatle, then they could do anything.
Yeah, definitely.
And with today's technology, my lord, the sky would be the limit.
Well, I don't think the technology. The technology certainly helps, but I thought you were going to bring up the, that whole Spanish-American War thing with the, where I guess it was the Pulitzer and Hearst paper.
Mm-hmm.
Where they started agitating for war, and then all of a sudden the battleship Maine blows up in Havana Harbor. And of course the rest is history, because the U.S. gets the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and some other island out of Spain. It was what was it? Guam. That's how they got Guam from Spain. But anyway, so that was 1898 or something.
97 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, the famous quote: "You provide me the pictures, and I'll provide the war." Right? That's American journalism at its finest. And I don't think it's any different now in the Middle East or wherever. Calling them prostitutes is too nice. They're a lot worse than that.
Well, Hearst was especially noxious. I think part of the reason that the Harrison's Narcotics Act was passed was because Hearst actually owned a lot of forests, I guess in Canada, and in northern United States, and for the paper. And the idea that hemp was going to be used, which is a lot cheaper, made it very key to keep it from becoming widely distributed. So that whole anti-marijuana thing that went on, it wasn't the only reason, obviously. I think the other reason was it was a great way to go after African Americans, but it was basically the money that would accrue to him because he sold. He would sell the wood to make the paper, and he didn't want the hemp. So anyway,
well, that's true. But I think what you're talking about is essentially the issue of false flags.
Right, exactly.
And that's a very important point. And I guess I was just kind of indirectly trying to build up to the idea that a common element in these setups, like let's say Oswald, is the use of doubles or faked storylines that make no sense. Now we have professional actors who seem to be involved in things, and it's not so much that we need to look at any one event and say we know the answers, because we can't really totally know the answers. Things are locked up. The JFK files are locked up for 75 years after they happened or something. And by the way, the Elvis Presley, all the legal documents are locked up for 50 years, so you can't get decent access to them.
What would be the point of that? I guess obviously they got something to hide.
Well, because in my opinion, the evidence is pretty strong that they took a guy who was very miserable in his personal life, getting by on pills and gaining a lot of weight, and his voice was starting to fade a little bit. And what's the value of an aging, fat rock star versus the image of a guy who was, the ultimate idol who dies in his prime?
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I've heard speculation that the Beatles worked for MI6 or is it MI5? I don't know. Are you saying that Elvis was also perhaps some type of agent or worked for some agency, or do you think that's just too far out there?
Well, wait a minute. It's well known that one of his band members was sent at the request of the feds. He was an FBI agent.
I didn't know that.
He didn't just like government badges, which he collected. He wanted to work with them. The pictures of him with Nixon or Carter are quite real, and he was a very interesting character. But I think that you need to look at the context, and this is the problem in a short discussion. His manager, the famous Colonel Tom Parker. Okay, you might have some image that this was a good old boy from the South. No, he was an illegal alien from Holland. He faked his death, came over and did the traditional paper trip, take a dead infant's birth certificate and pretend to be that person. And that's why he never wanted to get a passport or travel over to Europe, and they should have sent Presley touring Europe. But Parker didn't want to do it because he was afraid that he'd be busted. Anyway, that's just an example of how the game works. But Elvis was definitely in that atmosphere, but I don't think he was a whatever you want to call it, at that level of like CIA or something. No. But I do think the mafia tends to be operationally running record companies and booking agencies and things like that. And then I think that at some level, higher levels, they kind of know what they're doing. And if you look into the Beatles, look at McCartney's father, Tavistock, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty damning. How many people work at Tavistock? That's even more elite than, say, the Rand Corporation.
Yeah, it's definitely high up the ladder, high up the food chain.
That's pretty impressive. But then again, what do young guys know? I mean, how much would you know of what you're doing?
I think, sort of a random thought here, but I believe, is it Copeland from the Police? I believe his father's a CIA agent as well. There's a lot of and I think the Grateful Dead have some type of link with the CIA as well. But maybe I'm starting to veer too far off course here, but
Well, we might be veering a bit, but we're still in the general ball game that what you're seeing on TV or in the papers is a created reality. Copeland's father, I thought, was a high-level MI6 operative, and but as far as the others, like the Grateful Dead, well, Barlow, I think, admitted going to, CIA events and headquarters and all that. Barlow was like the number 2 writer for them after Robert Hunter. And as a matter of fact, there's an interesting article recently published called "Manufacturing the Deadhead," which people might be interested in. It's a discussion of, and it includes Terence McKenna and Gordon Wasson, the famous CIA mushroom guy, the guy behind, bringing psychedelic mushrooms to modern society. And I think when you look at that, you'll see that. Did you read the Inside the Laurel Canyon, the episode by Dave McGowan?
no, I haven't.
The whole rock music scene in the U.S. was essentially promoted, controlled, operated by military intelligence types. And Terence McKenna was promoting the archaic revival. He wanted to bring back the Dark Ages. And the key to doing that, of course, is to destroy, current civilization. And this doesn't mean everybody involved was doing bad things or thought they were doing bad things. But it does mean there were ulterior motives behind the people who were promoting it. And again, maybe it's a little off course here, but I'm just trying to say that we need to look long and hard at anything that we're told. And in the case of these people, who are they surrounded by? Who's funding things? And then back to the original issue, which is more like false flags and doubles and so on and so forth. You just can't trust any of this.
Well, you gotta think too that anything that's put in front of us and promoted and gets the media machine behind it, somebody's got an agenda usually. I mean, I've heard all kinds of bands that are, the music is just amazing, but they never make it for, who knows what reason. I guess they don't have this behind them.
Yes, and if you look into who's behind some of these people, it's really amazing that series of articles by Dave McGowan, you just can't believe the connections. The Rockefeller family, military intelligence. How about a little example here? Frank Zappa. His father worked in bioweapons research. Frank Zappa's wife was the secretary to the head of naval weapons research back in D.C. That's a position that's more highly classified than the president, right? That means you're working on the stuff that won't be visible for 50 years or something. That's your wife?
Yeah.
And then, when he lived in Laurel Canyon, he lived in the most expensive house. Here's a young guy who at the time had no money, living in the most expensive house in one of the most expensive areas of Southern California. Isn't that kind of interesting? And it's just hippies come here and do drugs and crash. And by the way, he was notorious for never using drugs, right? He was a control freak. Isn't that kind of suspicious?
Yeah, just a tad.
Don't you wonder if maybe they had video cameras and tests going on there and whatever? And I'm not trying to give him a hard time, really. I mean, his music is not necessarily, it's not bad, really. But I'm just saying you don't get funded if you do nothing. You got to be working for the man, essentially. And the whole rock business has a serious element of that. And then the ones who aren't so obviously, I think many of them ended up dead. In that book, The War on Rock, for example, it talks about, as I said, a number of them just get killed. The lead singer for the band In Excess from Australia, Michael Hutchence.
Yeah, that was very suspicious.
Okay, well, they say he was, enjoying himself and the rope, slipped or the chair slipped or whatever. But you know what they're not telling you? Two things. His hand was smashed, okay, so as in broken bones. And his estate was missing, over $100 million that he supposedly had in offshore tax havens, and it's just vanished. Well, that's like two problems too many for me.
Does that book mention Jimi Hendrix and his?
Yes, quite suspicious.
Yeah, that sounded like his agent. But
yes,
knows?
I think he was murdered. And again, it's the same story. If you're a mafia record company and the guy wants to leave you and go independent, you get no money from him, right?
That's right, cui bono. Right.
But if he ends up dead, eternally you get the rights, essentially. I mean, yes, of course. And by the way, like his, was it his girlfriend? Was seriously threatened. People around him were seriously threatened and murdered. And I think it's pretty strong. I think there's a strong case that he was murdered. But I don't think it was like a MI5 or something or whatever. I think it's just
probably
straight
mafia. Yeah,
just straight mafia kind of deal.
With the broken hand just kind of screams mafia.
Yeah, that's for sure. But the point is, it's not what it seems to be, and the press are totally useless. They just don't tell you anything, right? You look at this Boston bombing, and you just about have to, can't they give us any information at all? A friend of a friend's was essentially stuck in traffic in the Northeast when this was going down, and I mean they had constant reports about, whatever bombing at the Kennedy Center or what, things going on there, right? That essentially vanished from the news at some point.
It's like they had all these cover stories planted, and then, when things went awry, they basically just dropped the stuff that didn't make sense anymore.
Exactly. So you're kind of left looking at all this saying, what's going on here? And I think we also need to go back to the idea that in these special worlds, you and I are not in them. And, for example, these connections can be made if you study things, and then you have to say, oh, that's interesting. So, for example, have you heard of Howard Hughes? Do you know who he was?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, apparently, so here's the story. Here's this guy who was incredibly successful at many different things and rich, right?
Yep.
And he becomes a recluse, and he's afraid of
germaphobe
bacteria or whatever, right? Okay. But then while this is all going on, and I remember, you'd see reports of who was going to meet him. And it's like, wait a minute, this guy is not some weirdo with Alzheimer's because he's meeting serious players. And by the way, Elvis Presley regularly went to see him and flew on his jet. And apparently was friends with him. And I thought, at the time, I remember, there's something wrong here. And I didn't know what to make of it. But, not that long ago, there was a book published that made a very good case that Howard Hughes essentially replaced himself, shall we say, with that person. And he took on the life of a missing CIA pilot from Central America. And once, assuming that's true, once the new identity of Hughes had died, his widow got a biographer to look into it, all the photos and evidence and so on, and that's when this book got published or whatever a couple of years ago. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence for this, that's what he'd done. And most of his estate was stolen by his relatives, but nonetheless, he didn't like being rich and famous like that anyway. He would rather be a pilot or whatever, which is what he started at. You see these connections, and you have to sit there and say, that doesn't work with the official story. When they say that a guy is brain dead, but then he regularly has high-powered, lawyers coming, well, they don't need to talk to somebody who's brain dead. There's something more going on. And, Let me give you the example from the Elvis thing. Not long after he died, supposedly, the scandal sheet journalists came out, and they would say, and I remember this, it was like right after it happened, they said, Elvis is alive, and they showed you this picture of a fat, bald guy on a beach in Rio, right?
Okay.
And at the time, I was just astounded, because I'm sitting there saying, you're kidding me. If he staged his death, what's he walking on like the most famous beach in the world for? Right? And Elvis wasn't bald, so that's ridiculous. You know? And I'm sitting there to myself, it's like, I got a cousin who looks like Elvis, a little bit younger, right? He could pass for Elvis if you gave him, the Hollywood treatment. And it's like, you got to be kidding me.
Well, it just seems like they're intentionally muddying the waters. Right.
And at the time, I'm sitting here saying, they're not doing it with a guy who actually looked like him. So, later I realized this is how they operate. They intentionally muddy the waters with campaigns.
Yeah, definitely.
Big time. They got campaigns. They got this thing mapped out. And so this is another aspect that's confusing when you look at things like Boston or this recent thing in London, is, not only can you not trust videos anymore, right, or photos back in the Zapruder film day, but you also have people immediately coming out with all kinds of misleading stories. They've got fake witnesses all over the place, right? It's really painful that you think you're reading something that's relevant, and it's just totally fake, top to bottom fake. So it makes it hard to research some of these things. But what I do think we can see, stepping back a bit, is that there are these signs that give it away that something's wrong, that it's an unnatural, how can I say it, a certain response, a media campaign starting immediately after something like a school shooting is very suspicious.
Not only that, but every time one of these things happens, there's always a drill or something in the vicinity that this has happened that's almost, the playbook of what happened. And
right.
you would think that people are so wise to that now. You think they wouldn't do it, but yet they still did it at Boston.
Well, maybe they feel that it doesn't matter what 5 or 10% of the people think.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Then again, they also may just be getting so arrogant, right? That quote of, those whom the gods would destroy, they first drive mad, right?
Hubris.
Yes, and I would say looking at America, I see like endless hubris at the top.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that's one of the problems. But anyway, the broader topic is that they use doubles, they use fake events, they use it all. And then that's kind of like the groundwork for the false flag. And, it's probably a little controversial, but looking back on 9/11, a very high percentage of people who were shown on TV that day are dubious people. Like high-level people in the media complex. And so I would take what they have to say with a serious grain of salt.
And we all know that the CIA is notorious for recruiting people from within the media organizations because it's a perfect cover.
Oh, of course. I mean, they're blended together. I mean, the joke about CNN is it's the CIA news network. But my point is, when they say something like, I was sitting in my office and I saw the plane go in, or anything like that, I don't believe them at all. And I would just be very wary of this because, different people have looked into it and they say, hey, from that office you can't see anything. I'm not taking a position on what actually happened. I'm just saying we need to be aware that it may have just have been the greatest script the world's ever seen.
One thing they do have going against them, from my perspective, is the internet. I almost liken it to open source versus proprietary software, and open source is always going to be better because you've got the collective mind that's just going to hammer away at these problems and pick them apart, whereas the the non-open source type of operation is just so compartmentalized that they can't ever see the big picture. They can't ever pick out all the flaws.
Yes, but obviously they feel they've got ownership of all the major media, and they're counting on people being lazy or ignorant.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a tough race.
But I think... Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead,
I was going to say that the newspapers of record, New York Times, the Washington Post, L.A. Times, etc., their readership, because of the internet, is falling. I mean, has been falling for years. In fact, it's amazing that they're still in business. So I think, going back to what Oolong said, I think the internet has at least diffused some of that power. Just because you have alternate, you at least have an alternate source that's relatively easy to get at.
I don't think they're failing just because of the internet. I think they're failing also because people are just sick of being lied to, and I think people internally realize it, even if they don't consciously realize it, subconsciously, when you're being lied to, and it's sort of creating a distaste. And not only that, but people are become so dumbed down that they generally don't even watch the mainstream news anymore anyhow.
Yeah. Well, there's really not. Well, one might say dumbed down or dumbed up that they don't watch the mainstream news.
True.
Because but I think even the more radical alternate sources that one finds on the net, serve a function of sort of making it a little harder to create the narrative that they want to create, because there's going to be all these other little narratives floating around, some crazier than the original narrative, but it doesn't matter. I think it's helpful to have people have sort of more of a choice as to what kind of information they're going to consume. On the other hand, I think the educational system probably makes it so that people really can't take advantage of it, but that's a whole other story.
I almost wonder if we're reaching the 100th monkey effect as far as truth movement goes. Like it's starting to reach a point of critical mass where so many people are questioning the system now that is starting to permeate things a little more fluidly than it was before.
Well, but now we get into the question, though, is what do the guys on the other side think they're doing? Right? I mean, as an example, I think in the last day or so, a photo was released, supposedly taken from like the second story of a London bus, that shows the soldier who'd been killed with no blood. And why are they releasing that? In other words, they may want us to have certain arguments, right? Even if what they're releasing is true, the point is that nobody will believe us, right?
Wow.
So we have to be careful about, what do they think they're doing, and are we really reaching the 100th monkey, or are they muddying the waters?
As an example, during the London Olympics, there was all kinds of clues and hints that they dropped out there that something was going to happen, and I mean a lot of them. And whether they had just planned to do that to make the conspiracy crowd look crazy, or whether so many people picked up on it that they just decided not to go with it, I don't know. But it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, all I'm saying is it's clear that one of their strategies is to just throw an infinite amount of junk out there to turn off a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And that they are doing. So no matter what topic you pick, you can easily find somebody who will mess it up by bringing in something absurd like, aliens or time travel or something, right? They've got a professional corps doing that. But I do think, though, the bigger picture is that people are giving up on it and they don't believe in the major media anymore. And that's good. That's certainly good.
Yeah.
But what we really need, though, is a way of kind of, what can I say? We need to go beyond just the info war of, right? You know, I mean, people know the Kennedy thing was an inside job. It's not an information problem. It's a what do we do problem. But anyway, though, getting back to some of these angles, it is definitely interesting with the internet. Now we can get so much information. This Boston Marathon thing, you can make a strong case that the authorities totally screwed up, lost control of the narrative at different points, and had to go to Plan B or perhaps even Plan C or Plan D.
I think the initial plan was probably to blame that one on the Patriots.
I think so too. I think that was the Plan A, and I think it got messed up. You had people like Dan Bidandi going to the press conferences asking questions they'd never been asked before, and
that was hilarious.
showing videos and photos of things that they didn't want, and you could just see they really were losing control. And they, at the same time, you got different answers from the FBI and the Homeland Security, right? When they got somebody arrested and they're denying it, and so I think it probably was a totally botched operation on their side, and they had to go to high levels to decide how to resolve it. And they just said, well, resolve it by taking, patsies that we can totally control or whatever. And they also probably thought that by choosing Muslims, you would break the effect of, I guess what you would say, I don't know if you want to call patriot types, but, people like on the Alex Jones side. Their initiative. In other words, there have been a lot of people who were afraid that they were going to get blamed, for good reason, right?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk for a long time, and then there was that TV animated thing, Family Guy or something. I don't know American TV, but, Cowboy Al-Qaeda is the real threat, right? They've been pushing that idea that cowboys are going to be working with Al-Qaeda. Cowboy Al-Qaeda is the threat. And so, what can I say? A lot of cowboys were nervous. So the minute this thing started, it's like they're going to blame cowboys. You know it, right? So I think they lost control of the narrative, and I think this was a major victory. Having said that, I'm still mystified that they would choose guys who are so close to Graham Fuller, a top CIA operative. Involved in everything imaginable, Iran-Contra up to the eyeballs, you know what I mean? A key guy. So I don't really know. Maybe these guys got off the reservation and they weren't doing everything they were supposed to. I really don't know. But normally you're not going to see such a high-level connection with such a high-level guy, because this brings attention to these folks.
Well, what brings attention to those folks too is something I just read in the Die Welt, the German newspaper. It's pretty bad. You have to read the German newspaper to figure out that the Homeland Security apparently has bought 2,125 tanks. So never mind I wasn't aware of this. Did I miss something in our mainstream media about it, or? I knew about the bullets and stuff, but I did not realize that DHS was doing tanks. And so, what's interesting for me is to see, I did a quick search as to how widely diffused is this information, and actually, it's really not. Were you aware of it, or anyone on the panel aware of this?
Well, I'd kind of heard of it, but I didn't know the numbers.
That's a lot of tanks. That's we're getting ready for a blitzkrieg or something, and So how that plays with the population's view of the authorities is going to be quite interesting. I mean, I'm hoping that information will
well
more available.
The truth is, if we're lucky, Herm, if we're lucky, the whole Boston thing will blow up in their faces because it's got so many problems. The MIT cop who was killed, okay, MIT, the logical explanation of that, the word on the street at MIT, is that one of the suspects, knew the cop and called him and wanted to surrender. And the reason to go through an MIT cop, they're not as they're not as likely to shoot you, right? It's not the FBI. And so to prevent that from happening, they had to get rid of him. And it also, like with the Oswald case, it gave cause to make the police think these guys are violent killers. You know what I mean? It escalated the bloodlust. But when you take the whole case and you break it down, they locked down a town over a guy on the run. That's totally absurd. To bring in tanks and stuff for a guy on the run?
It's conditioning.
That's totally ridiculous.
I think you're right, conditioning.
Oh, it was conditioning, absolutely. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that when you explain this to people, I mean, if a documentary gets made about this, it's going to be a hell of a thing. It really could be taken apart in many ways and make a big difference. However, I'm concerned that we probably only have a couple of years before, I don't know how to put it, but let's just say the clamp down. I think they're going to make it harder to use the internet and distribute things like that, documentaries of that nature.
Oh, definitely. I think that's one of the agendas that was in the international meeting in Peru a week or two ago.
So I'm afraid we don't have too much longer to point it out. I mean, we'll see. But anyway, though, the thing about that is you could see how the new media, cell phones, how the internet, all that really disrupted their plans pretty seriously. And that's very, very good news. Getting back to the issue, though, of looking at it, have you taken the time to look at the photos and the whole, I mean, people analyzing it, this is just bad theater.
Yeah,
it looked, bad theater production.
Looked like a couple smoke bombs or something. Didn't really look like a whole lot of an impact.
Well, you had other things. You had like the guy from Fox, whatever his name is, Shepard or something, saying how things are blowing from inside the office to outside, and the whole thing just falls apart. It really falls apart.
Not to mention the two fellas with the Punisher logo that supposedly worked for the paramilitary organization. The one that was opened up by the SEAL 6 team guy who supposedly hunted down Bin Laden and who himself was later murdered. Like, it's crazy.
Well, that whole, Kraft International, was it?
Yeah, I believe that's it.
Chris Kyle's company. And Chris Kyle was murdered only a couple of months before.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that raises a whole bunch of questions. He may not have been with the program.
Well, either that or I wouldn't even half be surprised if he never really did get murdered. Maybe he just went into deep cover or something. I mean, who really knows at the end of the day?
That's true. That's true. But we can't really know. Now we're getting back to the whole topic that they have these doubles, they have these fake lives, and you can't be sure. You just really can't be sure. But to the extent that the cover story makes no sense, you can look at it and say, hey, no way. Doesn't pass the smell test. Right?
Yep. Would we be able to take a quick trip down Sandy Hook Lane plane? And because there's a lot of things there that really don't add up and don't make any sense.
Well, they're building a new school, right? They're replacing the old one, and spending 3 times as much as it should cost to do it. So
Well,
sure, let's look at that very suspicious and perhaps ritualistic event.
I heard the original school wasn't even being used. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Well, I do know they had Screen Actors Guild people on TV talking, and giving different versions of things, like where they were and what happened when. And that really kind of bothered me. But the thing that threw it over the top for me is that supposed father laughing, joking, joshing around, and then he gets into his actor's performance and he starts, being all serious and crying and whatever.
That was blatant. I mean, you could just see it. It was an actor getting into character. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Not to mention the old grandfatherly fellow. I can't remember his name, Mr. Rosen or something. Where supposedly after the shooting, the kids all went to his house for some strange reason. And then
that was the one. He's a Screen Actors Guild guy. I mean, it's
Yeah.
admitted that's what he is. So you look at that, and then you have to say, and I looked it over. If you look at the helicopter footage or satellite footage or whatever, you see that there's something very wrong here. And by the way, another thing is, did you notice that all the parents are basically, let's say, 55 years old or something, with the exception of that father who was an obvious actor?
No, I didn't notice.
Anyway, in their 50s, let's say early 50s. That's kind of unusual for primary school. They were way too old to actually be real parents of, 6-year-olds or whatever. And I mean, there are exceptions, but I'm just saying as a general rule. Anyway, there's just way, way too many things that don't work for this place. And it's looking, a lot of people argue it was just a ritual. And I think that makes sense because, frankly, I think the people at the top like to muck us. Hoodwink us.
Do you think any children were even in that building, though, playing?
Well, you had a couple of kids on TV saying it was a drill. But, I'm not sure that the scenes we've seen with the children actually happened on that day. The temperatures look exactly the same.
There's an interesting video from one of the news helicopters, and it's pulled back on the building, and you can actually see the people coming out of one door, walking around the building, going in the rear door, and then coming back out the original door again, almost like they're walking in a circle just to create the appearance that there's a bunch of people coming and going out of this, or actually the original news footage would have been on the ground, and it looked like, there's a bunch of people pouring out of the building, but it's actually just the same people over and over again. But your eye wouldn't catch it.
You also see suspicious interviews from, let's say, CNN, where they're claiming to be somewhere, and they may well not be there. And that's important because CNN is essentially, I guess what you would say, the official, it's like Pravda in the Soviet Union, right? It's America's Pravda.
Right.
It's the official party line of our rulers. And that tells you, in other words, they would know ahead of time, or at least certain people there would. Not everybody, but many would. So they have their kind of agenda.
Did you happen to notice the painting that one of the children gave to Anderson Cooper to give to the president? It just so happened to be an owl, which we all know is symbol for the Illuminati and Bohemian Grove and all
a lot
those
of things. Yes, isn't that sweet? Yeah. Now there are rumors. You might know better than I, but there are rumors that town is kind of notorious for Satanism or other isms that are of a dark nature.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I really can't swear to that, but it wouldn't surprise me because this seems like a very dark ritual. And, what can I say? I expect the worst from these guys. And if they're going to do something, right, let's just put it this way. In my young and naive days, I would have expected them to go to a sports stadium somewhere, right, and gun down hundreds of people, right? And they've never done that. And you kind of wonder why. Well, one reason is it would ruin a business that they control. They control the gambling and the other aspects of sports, right?
Yeah.
But I think really it's because that's too simple. I think they want to do it in devious ways and ritualistic ways. And in this case, I mean, the greatest thing they could achieve would be to do it with nobody, right? If you're going to pass laws banning guns or something, wouldn't the ideal way to do it to when it was just a totally fake event? They're sick people, you know.
You know, the Sandy Hook. I was reading that the Connecticut legislature is passing a bill that would block public release of the investigation, and would also block public release of all the 911 calls and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess that's a measure of just how much power there is there, because you know, getting Connecticut legislatures, having lived there for a while, to do anything in a reasonable amount of time is really difficult. But in this case, apparently the bill was drafted and will probably be voted on this week or next week. What's left of this?
Oh, it's
week.
a done deal. Term. The fact is, it's painful for us to admit, but the game's been rigged for a long time. There was a takeover, and we can debate whether it happened back in the old man Rockefeller's day or whether it happened with the assassination of Kennedy, right? Or, for that matter, with the dubious election victory of Bush. But at some point, clearly there was a takeover. It's just normally they don't put it in our faces, right? It's only when they need to, like in this case, that they just say, you know, we own all the legislatures. We do what we want.
Well, you can tell too that they kept trying different balloons, and if one didn't work, they would just try the next one. Like first there was Gabby Giffords, then there was the Batman shooting, then Sandy Hook, then Boston. It's just like one after another after another. It's just like they're almost trying to push people to the breaking point where they're going to say, all right, just take the guns, whatever, we've had enough of this.
Well, okay, now we can talk about the positive side. The positive side is we can make a good case that their strategies have been failing. We can't stop them from sealing public records about, you know, inside jobs like Aurora, Colorado or something. But we are making progress in exposing them, and also, in a sense, something that might even be more important, which is we're illustrating that their responses or desired responses are counterproductive or not rational, right? I mean, in other words, the more they're pushing these, let's say, school shootings, the more people can say, okay, let's have a discussion about it. How should we be handling school violence? Should we be giving all these kids dangerous drugs? Right? Over 90% of the school shootings involve those terrible drugs, right?
Allegedly,
yeah. Allegedly. Should we be creating, you know, zones where security guards can't have guns? Is that a good idea? Right? When all of our political leaders go everywhere, their security guards have guns, right?
Yep, exactly.
And let's face it, violent shootings and whatever are significantly down in the U.S. They're like 40% fewer than 20 years ago or something.
Not to mention, right, a lot of the shootings are actually like gangs, and, you know, the statistics are inflated to look worse than they actually are.
Well, and it's overwhelmingly suicide, too. So you can't really include suicide. I mean, in Japan, so they jump in front of a train or whatever, and, you know, that's not, there's nothing you can do about suicide. But my point is, I think it's backfiring. Their attempts to push people in certain directions may actually be failing badly. And the bad guys seem to be in a kind of a desperate hurry about different things, you know. maybe it's like the war in the Middle East, maybe it's like gun control, maybe it's different things, but they really act like they're in a hurry.
Well, could it be that, in my opinion, I would think they know that the dollar and they know that the economy is in a death spiral. And before that hits the bottom, they want to disarm the population because they know if they don't, there's going to be blood in the streets, and it's probably going to be theirs.
Well, that may be. But, I mean, you can make other arguments, too, you know. You could say that, first of all, you could talk about things like astrological influences or, you know, their expectations of different things. There are different ways to look at this, right? We could argue that they're under the control of demons, or you know what I mean. There are a lot of angles that one could look at, right?
Yep.
But I think I'll just go back and say I don't know that the dollar, look, they can crash it and create a new one, right? I'm not sure that's enough of a factor. That would be more a factor in international affairs, like if they want to boss around India, right, or other countries, Brazil, they need to do it when the dollar is still halfway a reserve currency. That makes perfect sense. But I'm not so sure about, let's say, you know, an issue of a biometric ID card. Why does it matter whether it takes 2 years or 10 years? And they seem to be really, really intent upon doing it now. And by the way, this is not just a U.S. thing. It's across the whole Western world.
I would say that, you know, part of the issue, too, is that they've got this, I don't know what you want to call it, Antichrist type system that they want to snap into place too, that Novus Ordo Seclorum, they want to get their new world order, which would be, you know, a one world currency, global government. So I think in order to have that, especially the United States, they've got to break the back of the people there.
Well, they may get the one world currency. They may get Bitcoin, but that's probably not what they're planning on.
Yeah, unless they take it over. I don't know how they would do that though.
The more I think about it, actually, with the peer-to-peer, you know, as long as you don't exchange it, I mean, what are they going to do? Go into everybody's computer? Well, I guess Microsoft is trying to do that now with Windows 8, but Linux is there, so you know, yeah, it's sort of interesting.
Well, again, though, they've set up this system where I would argue that their control is a mile wide, but it's an inch thick. They have the ability to do just about anything, it seems, but I really don't know that they have. I don't know how to put it, but look at international affairs. The truth is, almost the whole world would love to ditch the U.S. because the U.S. has abused its power. It's not really a love of China or anything like that. It's just, look at the quantitative easing. This is unreasonable. Food inflation, other things, this directly comes from the U.S. If you don't inflate your currency, the U.S. is going to buy everything in your country with its fake dollars, right?
Yep.
So to defend yourself, you've got to do the same thing, and it's not pleasant. So I guess I would just say it seems to me that they're in a hurry, partly over economics, but there seems to be something more. There seems to be something in the stars or something. I don't know what, but don't you feel that?
I would say you're probably right, but in my opinion, I think they're actually late on their agenda. I would say their agenda was probably supposed to have been put into place by now, and I think that they've run into a lot of snags along the way. And that's what a lot of these staged incidents are designed to do, is to kind of speed it up. But again, they're in such a hurry that these things are coming out really sloppy, and people are getting really wise to it, and it's in a lot of ways having the opposite intention that they intended.
Well, that's what I was trying to say, is that there's a positive side here, and then I also think there's a positive side on the technology front or the invention front. They may not have long before technology overwhelms them. For example, cheap energy. If we had cheap, decentralized energy, how would you control people? You could live in a forest or a desert or a mountain or whatever and be on your own.
That's a whole other topic. We could get into how many inventors have been suicided, let's put it that way. That might be a topic for another night.
Well, sure. Technology is, something we're all quite interested in and fairly knowledgeable about. I think that's a big topic. Andrea Rossi's e-catalyzer just had a few scientists come out, serious scientists, saying they'd done a lot with it, and one of his users, and, incredibly impressive results. Now, I'm not trying to hype him, but I'm just trying to say that, as Catherine Austin Fitts has talked about, energy technology may be unstoppable at this point, in which case they need food or water to control people.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you have cheap energy, you can make water out of the atmosphere. Right? They already have these things. You can already buy things that'll provide you a lot of water out of, if you live in a desert or wherever.
Basically dehumidifiers.
Basically dehumidifiers. So the point is, this technology may be unstoppable at this point. And that might be one of the things that's really making them hysterical. Because it's not simply this one invention or this one guy. It's the whole world is working on stuff. All over Asia, you've got all kinds of companies. And many of them are seriously already being used by major utilities.
The thing is...
Like Hong Kong or something like that. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it goes back to this open source model again, and how that's so much more superior to the proprietary stuff, because, when someone goes and registers a patent, it's so easy for them to quash that patent or intimidate that person. But when you take an idea and you have an open source model and you throw it out there for the universe, everybody's going to grab onto that, or maybe not everybody, but at least enough people that it's going to reach critical mass. And it's a lot harder to control that now. So yeah, you're definitely right.
But the other issue is not simply that. The other issue is that the global power structure that we've grown up on, and is really Catherine Austin Fitts talks about it, the central banking, warfare model, right? That's really been based in London and New York. And then secretly, a whole bunch of it's been out of, let's say, Switzerland and Amsterdam and Germany, right? And it goes back forever, centuries and centuries. But the visible side, the last few hundred years, has been there. Okay, but the rest of the world doesn't like it. And if you travel around Asia, the whole place is booming. They want to use these energy technologies. They don't want to use petroleum. And how are you going to stop them? In other words, it's easy to see, okay, the CIA can do this, that, or the other to you and me. But what are you going to do to Hong Kong? It's very unclear to me that they can stop Asia from rising at this point.
Well, I don't think they can, short of some type of armed conflict, which I think Brzezinski actually was pushing for at one point, said that it was better to confront China early than later, which I think is also something that Machiavelli wrote, that, you're better off fighting your opponent early because if you wait too long, then your opponent's going to get stronger.
Well, that could be this other reason for why they seem so demonically frenetic nowadays, right? And you see that in the Middle East. They're just getting hysterical and hysterical. One mistake after another, one problem after another. And, who knows? I don't know what they will do. I mean, on the ground, they've lost. Okay, the war in Syria, even their ideas in Lebanon and other things are not going well. So how this will play out, I don't know. But you can see they're getting very frenetic. And I think the reason is not so much because of Syria or Hezbollah or something. It's because of Central Asia and the pipeline going from the Mediterranean to China. These pipelines are being built as we speak. The ports like Gwadar in Pakistan next to the Iranian border, these things are being built. It's not long before the whole power structure on Earth will change because the U.S. control of the oceans won't be nearly as important.
Well, when you look at the Roman Empire, even, the Roman Empire was originally a military and economic power. Then it actually lost the economic ability and it became just a military power. And I think right now that's where the United States and the West stands.
I agree. And that's unstable. And speaking of Brzezinski, you know that there's a famous quote in his book, The Grand Chessboard, essentially saying that the greatest threat to the current, American geoprimacy comes from Russia, China, and Iran being united. Not ideologically, but just out of mutual interest.
Which is ironic because the actions that the West is taking is actually pushing them down that path.
Right, exactly. And I think it's a sign of their frenetic stupidity that, for example, you should anger either Russia or China, but not both. Just out of your own self-interest. But they're going crazy, and so they're making all these mistakes. And I think you see it whether it's a push for gun control or the list goes on and on. Now, it's undoubtedly true that they can pass any law they want because they've got the goods on almost every legislature, right? They can put a gun to their heads. But
or a video on that.
Well, that's what I mean. But when they do that, it ruins the game for them. Because let's say they do that. What do you think the response will be? Okay, don't take the Connecticut with Sandy Hook. Let's say they decide that, okay, we got to break the resistance on gun control. Okay, we're going to go to a state that's pro-gun, Texas or Florida, right? And we're going to pass ridiculously strict rules. What do you think the public sentiment's going to be? The public sentiment is going to be, this makes no sense, I don't believe it, you're all a bunch of paid-off criminals, or whatever, right? There's going to be like a massive recall campaign. We're going to vote out every politician. And it'll succeed. Unless the courts throw out all the recalls.
Well, okay, they'll vote these guys out, then they'll just get a new batch of crooks that are going to do the same thing the powers that be tell them to do. So what difference does it make?
Well, the difference it makes is they will be forced to use their trump cards. And their trump cards are martial law. In other words, they'll just institute martial law. And they won't call it that, but they'll call it something else, like due to the political instability in Florida and Texas, we will never have elections again. Right? Okay, fine. But the point, though, is that do you realize the world response? I mean, can you imagine how it would look in Asia or wherever in Brazil? The United States is, ending elections. That's a hell of a price they'd have to pay, right? And that's why they haven't done it. It's because for decades, their whole look at this crap in wars, our wars and our assassination. It's all because we want to promote democracy, right? And if we don't have democracy in Florida or wherever, then how can we go to war in Syria to promote it?
The hypocrisy will be kind of laid bare for everyone to see.
Well, it's already laid bare. It's already laid bare. I just saw a bumper sticker a couple of weeks ago on a pickup truck, and it said something to the effect of "Be nice to us, or we'll bring democracy to your country."
Yes.
And I thought, wow, because there was a gun rack in the back there too. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I think you're right. I think it is. I think people's skepticism levels, whether or not they're fed the wrong information, their skepticism is much higher than perhaps it was a few years ago. So.
Yeah, I think we're already at the end. We've achieved democracy. How's that? May God help us.
Right. I just hope they don't bring democracy to the United States the way they're bringing it elsewhere. That would be quite interesting.
Well, actually, I think they have, and that's the reason that creating the CIA was a mistake. Is you created this group that they're supposed to do everything imaginably bad around the world, but swear on the Bible you'll never do it at home.
Right.
And the kind of people you end up hiring and giving that authority to are the kind of people that would make, Skorzeny seem like a really nice guy. So...
The obvious irony here is that the United States itself is not even a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. It just, every time I hear people say democracy, I just kind of cringe. Because the founding fathers were very skeptical about democracy, right? That's basically just mob rule.
Well, they certainly seem to be skeptical about making sure that the rights of the minority would be protected, which I think was a good thing. But whether that's worked out in the past 50 years or so, I don't know.
Well, it was an enlightened perspective for their time, let's just say that. As far as the merits of democracy and republic, I think there are a lot of problems with it. One is that democracy in the modern world is not really like a better version of, or a good version of what they were talking about in Greece. Democracy in the modern world is a parliamentary democracy, which is a parliamentary dictatorship. And really, you see it in Britain, you see it in Japan. The top 4 people who control a party are dictators. Even a member has nothing. That's it. Has no power. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they've brainwashed us into the idea that democracy is you vote for a member of parliament who votes for one of the top leaders of the party, and then it's a party dictatorship, just like the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a separate problem. But I'm with you, Oolong. I'm just saying it's definitely it's even more nefarious than that. We have fake democracy, and by the way, there were fake republics. East Germany was a republic, right?
Yeah. Well,
you know what I'm saying? In other words, you get fake choices, is what I'm trying to say. It's really important that we not only separate the fake images they give us, we need to think about the fake ideas.
Yeah, usually you get a false dichotomy. You can either have Coke or Pepsi, but you can't have 7-Up. You only get Coke or Pepsi.
Yeah, I was going to say Noam Chomsky.
We need to be able to make our own drinks.
I'll go for that.
Okay, we can finish. Herm, you got something on Chomsky?
Yeah, I was just going to say Chomsky and Herman used to call it the primary operating falsehoods, and that you can't cross them. There are these things that are these barriers to investigation, because if you break through them, then the whole wall crumbles down. So, and I think I don't agree with Mr. Chomsky about his solutions, but he certainly, him and Edward Herman seem to have a pretty good bearing on the problems, or at least as far as they went during the Vietnam War days. So
let's not forget
for sure.
Chomsky was paid by the CIA. Let's not forget that.
Oh, well, that I didn't know.
Yeah, that came out not too long ago. He had some type of contract with them.
Well, no surprise. Come on, he's an MIT. Come on, he defends the paradigm in all the 60s removals. But the point, look, he had a bright mind, a lot of analysis, but anyone in a high position has to go with with the flow, so to speak. You can't be a representative from MIT and challenge the system.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work that way.
Not only that, but the fact that he's the face of the opposition, right? He's the dissenter. That tells you right there, if he's such a public face, he's probably compromised or working for them.
Agreed. For sure.
So anyway, can we bring this back?
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah, let's bring it back to the original topic and then maybe wrap it up and tie it all together in a neat little bow, if such a thing can be done.
Well, I'm not sure I can, but what I was just trying to say for this discussion tonight was the idea that call it Hollywood, call it image control, call it memeering, call it a bunch of things. That's what we need to look at, and that's what they're working at. That's the level they're at, and they've been doing it a long time. Since at least Bernays, it's been a science, and they give us these images, and whether it's an image of democracy and it's not really a democracy that is useful, or whether it's an image of what security means. What does security mean? Does it mean banning gunpowder? Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, they give us all these fake images and these fake solutions and fake ideas, and we need to look long and hard at everything that's presented because they've basically been lying to us for, 80 years now. And it's time to try to wake up and take the mask off.
I think it's coming. I think we're reaching a point of critical mass with the truth movement. And I think, again, that 100th monkey effect that, once the 100th monkey learns something, it becomes a shared trait. And again, back to my theory about the open source model, it just seems like we've got that going for us as long as we've got the internet. We're going to have all these heads hammering away at these things or throwing at us, breaking them apart, which is a great thing.
I agree. One other thing I would say is if we can break through on different people might be different, but if we can break through on an issue and get from 5 or 8% to, let's say, 18 or 20% or something, then they can no longer mock us. Because that's their big secret weapon, is that they mock us. Okay, in Portland, Oregon, they just had a vote on fluoride in the water. 60% voted against fluoride. The media, everything was overwhelmingly, you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist. Don't you know that fluoride's good for you? You hate the children.
You're pro-cavity.
Poor children don't have money for dentists. You're evil, and you're crazy. And 60% said no. Now that's a great victory, because the victory was not really fluoride. The victory was mind control.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
And if we can find an issue, I mean, I mentioned the idea that I think it's a tremendous amount of evidence that Elvis didn't die, as we're told. That's just a random thing. 911 is a better, topic probably. But if we can break through the mind control, as I said, their control grid is a mile wide and an inch thick. And mind control is the key. So that's what we need to break. And I think we're getting closer.
Yeah, all you got to do for the most part is just give somebody that one piece of critical evidence that snaps them awake, right? They kind of see something, they're like, yeah, that really doesn't make sense. And then that'll get the ball rolling. And I think that's what happened with 9/11. Like, so many people looked at that, and that was the moment of awakening for a lot of people. I think they really screwed up on that one.
I'm hopeful. I think different people will wake up with different things. Some people can wake up more with an economic thing, and some people, you know what I mean, some people will be bothered by different issues, gun control or food, like natural foods, right? Putting farmers in jail for raw milk, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
That wakes up certain people. But we definitely are getting to a higher percentage, so we're on the right track. And let's just hope that we get enough people soon enough so that it's hard for the bad guys to just clamp down totally. Well, on that note, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, it's been an enlightening conversation. Thanks, Plain, for sharing your time with us, and thanks, Herm, for joining.
And thank you all. I've learned quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to The Plain Truth on Time Monk Radio. Please be sure to tune in next week as we navigate our way through technological game changers. All right, we'll catch you again later, guys.
All right,
and we'll talk again.